What would you do if the man who condemned you to failure got down on his knees and begged you for a job? He laughed in my face when I was nothing. He didn't know he was signing the blueprint for my first billion. They say your past is a life sentence. For me, it was just the beginning. My name is Alex, and for a long time, I wasn't a person. I was a number. Inmate C28471. A label that followed me out of those iron gates, stamped on my forehead, a ghost that whispered danger, unreliable, lost cause to every person who looked my way. I remember the first time I saw my own reflection after getting out. I didn't recognize the man staring back. His eyes were hollow, holding a darkness that sunshine couldn't seem to touch. I had served my time, paid my debt to society. But society wasn't interested in the payment. It wanted interest, a perpetual tax of shame and suspicion. Hey, is this story getting to you on your side of the screen? Can you feel the weight of that judgment, the chill of those closed doors? Being able to put yourself in the shoes of someone who has lost everything and is fighting for a second chance is one of the most human things there is. If you've connected with this journey, do me a crucial favor. Comment below what state you're watching from and tell me which moment of the story touched your heart the most. That's how I know you're connected to our mission of spreading stories of redemption and believing that everyone deserves a chance to start over. And listen to this. The vast majority of people who get emotional with these stories aren't even subscribed to the channel yet. If you believe in second chances, I invite you to subscribe now. It's completely free, and you'll continue to receive the most profound stories of human transformation straight to your feed. Also remember that at the end of this video, you'll find other incredible journeys of rebirth on your screen. If this story is touching you, drop a comment below with where you're watching from and what time it is there. Let me know you're here, believing in a comeback. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. To the day I learned that rock bottom has a basement. The memory of that day is etched into my skin, a scar that doesn't fade. 3 months out. 3 months of, "We'll keep your resume on file," of polite smiles that didn't reach the eyes, of phone calls that never came. This interview was different. It was for a construction laborer job. Honest work, hard work, the kind that leaves your hands raw and your body aching, but your soul clean. The company was small, owned by a man named Frank. I'd heard through the grapevine he was an ex-con himself. A glimmer of hope, a tiny, fragile thing, sparked in my chest. Maybe he would see me. Not the inmate, but the man. His office was in a trailer at a construction site, smelling of sawdust, coffee, and stale cigarettes. Frank was a mountain of a man, his face a roadmap of a hard life, his knuckles scarred. He didn't look up from his paperwork when I walked in. I handed him my resume, a single, flimsy piece of paper that held the entirety of my desperate future. He skimmed it, his eyes, cold and assessing, flicked from the paper to me. "Says here there's a gap in your employment." My throat was sandpaper. Yes, sir, I was incarcerated. The word hung in the air, toxic and heavy. I rushed to add, "But I've taken vocational training, welding. I'm a hard worker. I just need a chance." Frank finally looked at me, a long, slow look that started at my worn-out shoes and ended at my nervously clasped hands. And then he did the one thing I wasn't prepared for. He laughed. It wasn't a warm laugh. It was a harsh, grating sound. "A chance," he sneered. "You think I built this from nothing by giving chances to people like you?" He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "I know your type. Lazy. Entitled. Thinking the world owes you something." I pulled myself up. I didn't need handouts. I don't run a charity for criminals trying to feel better about themselves. The world slowed down. The hum of the generator outside became a distant drone. I watched, paralyzed, as his thick fingers took hold of my resume. He didn't just crumple it. He made a show of it, his eyes locked on mine, a cruel performance of absolute power. He tore it slowly, once, then again. The sound was like a bone breaking. He let the pieces, the shreds of my hope, flutter down onto his desk like confetti at the world's most miserable party. "Get out," he said, the words flat and final. "Don't waste my time again." I stood up. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. I didn't say a word. What was there to say? I walked out of that trailer, the torn paper a phantom weight in my hand. The sun was bright, but I felt frozen. That was the moment the last flicker of the old Alex died. The one who still believed in fairness, in empathy. As I stood there, surrounded by the skeleton of a building being erected, a different kind of foundation was being laid inside me. Not of hope, but of cold, hard, unyielding resolve. He thought he was throwing away my future. He was just handing me the blueprint for my own. The walk home from Frank's office was a funeral march for the man I thought I could be. Each step echoed with the sound of tearing paper. The city around me, once a landscape of potential, now felt like a prison of a different kind. Its walls built not from concrete and steel, but from judgment and closed doors. I didn't go home. I went to the river, the same dirty industrial river I could see from my tiny apartment window. I sat on a cold bench and watched the water carry the city's filth out to sea. And I let the anger come. Not the hot, blinding rage of my youth that landed me in trouble, but a cold, dense, tectonic anger. It settled in my bones, a new kind of skeleton. Frank hadn't just rejected me, he had defined me. In his eyes, I was my crime. I was my inmate number. And in that moment, I made a decision. If the world was only going to see me as a criminal, then I would use a criminal's resolve. I would be relentless. I would be cunning. I would outwork, outthink, and outlast every single person who looked at me and saw a lost cause. That night, in the oppressive silence of my studio apartment, I didn't sleep. I took out a notebook. On the first page, I wrote a single sentence. They see a liability. I will become an asset. The next pages filled with a frantic, desperate energy. Ideas. Schematics. I remembered the welding certification I'd gotten inside, the one Frank had scoffed at. It was a skill. A real, tangible skill. I also remembered the countless conversations in the yard, the men talking about their old jobs in construction, the shortcuts contractors took, the shoddy materials, the frustrated homeowners. There was a gap in the market, not for the cheapest contractor, but for an honest one who understood that a man's home was his sanctuary, and to build it or repair, it was a sacred trust. The irony was so thick I could taste it. My integrity, the very thing the world said I lacked, would be my selling point. The following months were a blur of a different kind of hardship. This wasn't the passive hardship of waiting for a call. It was the active, grueling hardship of building something from less than nothing. I used the last of my gate money to buy the cheapest, most basic welding rig I could find. Second-hand, held together with prayer and duct tape. My office was the parking lot of my building. My marketing was walking into every small machine shop, every auto body place within a 10-mile bus radius, offering my services for cash, at half the rate of anyone else. I was met with the same suspicion, the same hesitant looks. But this time, I had something to show, not just a resume to present. "Let me fix that broken gate," I'd say. "If you don't like the weld, you don't pay." It was a gamble with my last few dollars for gas and rods, but it was a gamble I had to take. The first job I landed was for a gruff old auto shop owner named Leo. His hydraulic lift had a critical crack. He needed it fixed yesterday. I worked for 6 hours straight under the flickering fluorescent lights of his garage, the smell of oil and ozone filling my lungs. When I was done, the weld wasn't just functional. It was a work of art. Clean, strong, perfect. Leo inspected it, grunted, and handed me the cash. Then he handed me another 50. For the hustle, he said, his eyes holding a glimmer of something that wasn't pity. It was respect. That $50 tip felt heavier, more valuable than any paycheck I'd ever received. It was the first brick in my new foundation. I was no longer Alex, the ex-con. I was Alex, the welder. It was a start. But the ghost of Frank's torn resume was still there, tucked into my wallet, a constant reminder that respect was a currency I would have to earn in single, hard-fought transactions. And the biggest transaction of my life was just around the corner, waiting in the form of a broken-down, forgotten factory on the wrong side of town. That first job for Leo was more than a paycheck. It was a transfusion of life back into my soul. The weight of the cash in my pocket was a tangible counterweight to the phantom feeling of those torn resume scraps. I walked out of that garage, standing a little taller, the scent of oil and success clinging to my clothes like a new cologne. I immediately reinvested every dollar, buying more welding rods, a better mask, a heavier-duty pair of gloves. My parking lot empire began to expand. Word of mouth, that ancient and most powerful of networks, started to work. It wasn't fast, and it wasn't glamorous. I was the guy you called for the jobs no one else wanted. The rusted-out dumpsters, the broken industrial fencing, the weird custom fabrication for artists who had more vision than budget. I lived on coffee, cheap noodles, and the sheer addictive high of proving Frank wrong with every spark of my torch. Each completed job was a silent scream into the void. I am here. I am capable. I am more than my past. I rented a small, leaky storage unit to work out of when it rained. It was cold in the winter, an oven in the summer, but it was mine. I painted Apex Fabrication on the door in sloppy, hand-brushed letters. Apex, the highest point. It was a declaration, a promise to myself. It was during a job for a local scrapyard, repairing the mangled claw of a giant crane, that I saw it. Tucked away in a forgotten corner, being slowly consumed by weeds and rust, was an old industrial CNC machine. Its control panel was shattered, its guides were seized with corrosion, but its bones were good, a massive, hulking relic of American manufacturing. The scrapyard owner saw me looking. "Junk," he grunted. "Been here for years. Takes up space. You want it? It's yours. Just get it the hell out of here." It felt like fate. This machine, discarded and left for dead, was a mirror of my own story. I spent the next 2 weeks and every cent I had saved, hiring a flatbed truck and bribing a couple of guys from the auto shop to help me muscle the 3-ton beast into my storage unit. My neighbors thought I was insane. Maybe I was. For the next 6 months, that machine was my obsession. I spent my days on paying jobs and my nights on my knees, painstakingly dismantling, cleaning, welding broken parts, and scavenging for replacement electronics in online forums. I taught myself rudimentary programming from ancient manuals I found in a library. The learning curve was a vertical cliff, and I fell more times than I climbed. There were nights of utter despair, where I'd lie under a tangle of wires, grease-coating my face, convinced I was just a fool chasing a phantom. But then, one rainy Tuesday at 3 a.m. it happened. I plugged in the rebuilt controller, entered a simple test code, and held my breath. The machine hummed to life. Servos whirred, the spindle spun up with a healthy growl, and the bed moved with a precise, beautiful grace. In the stark, single bulb light of my storage unit, surrounded by the ghosts of my past, I watched as the machine executed a perfect, simple cut on a piece of scrap aluminum. It was a circle. A perfect, flawless circle. I sat down on the concrete floor, my back against the cold metal of my creation, and I cried. They weren't tears of sadness or self-pity. They were tears of pure, unadulterated creation. I had taken something the world called junk and given it a new purpose. In doing so, I had done the same for myself. That CNC machine wasn't just a tool, it was my partner. And together, we were about to change the game. The world of small batch, custom manufacturing was about to get a new player. One who wasn't afraid of broken things, because he knew exactly how to fix them. The hum of the CNC machine became the soundtrack of my new life. It was a sound of precision, of control, the absolute antithesis of the chaotic noise of prison or the deafening silence of rejection. That machine, my Phoenix, didn't just cut metal. It carved a path. With it, I could now offer something nobody else in my price range could. Custom, precision machine parts, fast and for a fraction of the cost. Apex fabrication was no longer just about welding broken things. It was about building new ones. The work poured in. Small tech startups needing prototypes, boutique automotive shops requiring custom brackets, even a film studio needing prop parts. I was working 20-hour days, my storage unit transformed into a hive of controlled chaos. I hired my first employee, a quiet, brilliant kid named David straight out of tech school who didn't care about my past, only about the elegant code we could write for the Phoenix. He was the first person who looked at me and saw an engineer, a founder. That trust was a foreign and terrifying currency, and I guarded it with my life. But growth is a crucible. The bigger Apex became, the more we brushed up against the established players. And the established players had long memories. The whispers started. A concerned citizen tipped off the fire marshal, who found a dozen minor fixable violations. A local business blog ran a story titled, "From Convict to Capitalist, Can You Trust Apex?" It was a hatchet job, dredging up my past, framing my hustle as suspicious, my low prices as a potential front for something illicit. The phone, which had been ringing off the hook, grew quiet. David came to me, his face pale. "Two clients just cancelled their big orders, Alex. They said they couldn't afford the reputational risk." The word felt like a physical blow. Reputational risk. I was a virus. My past was a contagion, threatening to infect anyone who did business with me. The old cold anger from the riverbank began to thaw, threatening to boil over. I wanted to find every one of those bloggers, every whispering competitor, and I stopped myself. That was the old Alex. The one who reacted, the one who ended up in a cage. I looked around my cramped, bustling unit. At David, who believed in me. At the Phoenix, which I had rebuilt with my own hands. At the piles of raw material waiting to be transformed. I had built this, not with my fists, but with my mind and my resolve. I couldn't fight their whispers with shouts. I had to drown them out with a roar of undeniable success. So, I did the one thing they would never expect from an ex-con. I became radically transparent. I invited the local newspaper in for a tour, not hiding from my past, but addressing it head-on. Yes, I was incarcerated. I told the reporter, my voice steady. I made a terrible mistake, and I paid for it. The man who runs Apex isn't the same angry kid who went in. This company is my amends. My integrity isn't just a slogan. It's the only asset I have left. I showed her my books, my processes, the letters of thanks from satisfied clients. The article that came out was different. It was titled "The Redemption of Apex," building a future, one precision, cut at a time. The story went minorly viral. Orders didn't just return, they exploded. But more importantly, an email landed in my inbox. It was from a massive aerospace contractor. They had a problem. A specialized, obsolete part for a legacy aircraft was no longer being manufactured. Grounding a single plane costs tens of thousands of dollars a day. They needed 50 units, and they needed them in 2 weeks. Every major machine shop had turned them down. The setup cost was too high, the timeline impossible. It was $1 million problem, and they were asking me, Apex Fabrication, the company run out of a storage unit by an ex-con, to solve it. This was it. The moment. Not to prove I was innocent, but to prove I was indispensable. Failure meant bankruptcy. Success meant everything. The email from Stratus Dine Aerospace glowed on my screen, a beacon of impossible scale. $1 million purchase order. The number was so large it felt abstract, like monopoly money. But the technical schematics attached were brutally concrete. The part was a complex bracketing assembly for a decommissioned military transport plane now used for fighting wildfires. Tolerances within thousandths of an inch. A proprietary nightmare-to-machine titanium alloy. 50 units? 2 weeks. My first instinct was panic, a cold wave of it that tightened my chest. This was Stratus Dine. They didn't send these requests to shops like mine. They had entire departments full of PhDs. This had to be a mistake, or worse, a cruel joke. Someone had seen the article and decided to see the ex-con squirm. David read the specs over my shoulder, his usual calm replaced by wide-eyed disbelief. Alex, this is insane. We don't have the tooling. The material cost alone would bankrupt us if we mess up even one. The Phoenix is good, but this is orbital class. Or, I stared at the torn piece of my resume, still tucked in my wallet. I thought of Frank's voice. I don't run a charity for criminals. This wasn't a charity. This was a trial by fire, a crucible that would either forge us into something unbreakable or melt us down to nothing. We're doing it, I said, my voice quieter than I intended. Alex, we're doing it, I repeated, turning to him. The fear was still there, but it was now fuel. This is the door. They're either slamming it in our faces, or we're kicking it off its hinges. There is no in-between. The next 48 hours were a sleepless frenzy of calculation and risk. I leveraged everything, the business, the equipment, my own meager savings, to secure a line of credit for the raw titanium, a fortune in shimmering silver-blue metal that arrived on a pallet, looking both beautiful and terrifying. David and I worked in shifts, reprogramming the Phoenix, designing custom jigs, our world shrinking to the 4 walls of the storage unit. The smell of hot metal and stress became permanent. We hit a wall on day 3. The tooling we had wasn't precise enough. The first test piece was scrap, a $5,000 mistake melting into a useless slug. A deep, gnawing despair set in. We were out of our depth. We were going to lose everything. And then, in the silence of another 3 a.m., I had a thought. It wasn't an engineer's thought. It was a convict's thought. A MacGyver in hell thought. The problem was vibration, a microscopic chatter that ruined the finish. The textbook said you needed a $100,000 dynamic stabilizer. We didn't have that. But we had scrap. We had desperation. I spent the next 6 hours welding together a contraption from old shock absorbers, weighted belts, and repurposed hydraulic dampers. It looked like something from a mad scientist's lab, bolted crudely to the side of the Phoenix. David looked at it, sleep-deprived and skeptical. You've got to be kidding me. I'm all out of jokes, David. Run the program. He hit the start button. The machine whirred to life. The new stabilizer shuddered and groaned, but it held. We watched, barely breathing, as the spindle traced its path through the impossibly hard titanium. An hour later, it finished. David carefully unclamped the part. He took out the digital calipers, his hands trembling. He measured once, twice, 3 times. He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed but blazing with a light I'd never seen before. "It's perfect, Alex. It's goddamn perfect." We didn't sleep for the next 10 days. We lived on coffee and the electric thrill of defying the impossible. We became a machine ourselves, a single, focused organism of creation. On the morning of the 14th day, as the sun rose, we packed the 50th and final unit into a custom crate. The Stratusdyne truck arrived at 8 a.m. sharp. As it pulled away, carrying $1 million of our soul inside, David and I stood in the parking lot, covered in grime and exhaustion. We didn't say a word. We just watched it until it turned the corner and disappeared. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of promise. We had done the impossible, but the true cost and the true reward of that victory were still waiting to be revealed. The biggest shock wasn't the check that cleared, it was the phone call that came a week later. The Stratusdyne payment hit our account, $1.2 million. The number sat there, a string of digits so long it seemed to break the bank's website. David and I stared at the screen in the sterile, air-conditioned quiet of our new, small office unit we'd just rented. There was no yelling, no high fives, just a profound, deafening silence. We had done it. We had climbed the impossible mountain. We should have been celebrating, but a different kind of weight had settled on us. The weight of what came next. The phone call came a week later. It wasn't from Stratusdyne. It was from a venture capital firm in Silicon Valley. They'd heard the story, the ex-con who solved $1 billion company's unsolvable problem. They wanted to talk. A week after that, David and I were on a private jet, a surreal experience that felt like walking onto a movie set, headed to California. We sat in a conference room with a glass wall overlooking the entire bay. The man across the table, a sleek, ageless VC named Robert, slid a term sheet across the polished wood. "It's a simple story, Alex," Robert said, his voice calm, almost hypnotic. "A story of redemption, of grit. The market loves it. We want to scale it. We're offering $50 million for a majority stake. We'll take Apex public within 18 months. You'll be a billionaire." The number hung in the air, more abstract and terrifying than the Stratusdyne payment. A billionaire. It was the ultimate fuck you to Frank, to every door that had been slammed in my face. It was validation on a global scale. I looked at David. His eyes were wide, swimming with the sheer scale of the opportunity. This was the dream, wasn't it? But as Robert kept talking, laying out the vision, relocating to the Valley, rebranding to Apex 2.0, focusing on the narrative, hiring a professional CEO to manage the growth, I felt something curdle inside me. He wasn't talking about my company. He was talking about an asset. My past, my pain, my redemption. It was all just a marketing strategy to him. Apex wasn't a company I had built to prove I was a man. It was a product he wanted to sell. He was offering me a golden throne, but to sit on it, I would have to hand over the very soul of the thing I had built. I thought of the storage unit, the smell of welding smoke and rain, the perfect circle cut by the Phoenix at 3 a.m., the respect in Leo's eyes when he handed me that extra 50, the quiet, focused work with David. That was my empire. Not this glass tower. Not this billion-dollar valuation. I stood up. The motion felt slow, deliberate, like I was moving through water. Robert stopped talking. surprised. "Thank you for the offer, Robert," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "It's incredible, but Apex isn't for sale." The silence in the room was absolute. David looked at me as if I'd just spoken in tongues. Robert's polished smile didn't falter, but his eyes turned cold. "Alex, be reasonable. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Think about what you're walking away from." "I am," I said, looking not at him, but out the window at the sprawling, perfect city below. "I'm thinking about exactly what I'm walking away from." I turned and walked out of the conference room, David scrambling to follow me. I had just turned down more money than I could ever have imagined, and for the first time since I walked out of Frank's trailer, I felt completely, utterly free. I had built my empire. Now, I had to prove I was worthy of being its king. The real work was just beginning. The flight back from Silicon Valley was shrouded in a heavy silence. David stared out the window at the clouds, the $50 million what if hanging unspoken between us. He was a pragmatist, an engineer. He saw a perfectly optimized growth trajectory we had just derailed. I saw a soul we had just saved. When we landed, we didn't go to the new office. We went back to the old storage unit. It was empty now, except for the Phoenix, standing proudly in the center like a monument. The smell of grease and metal was a welcome home. I placed my hand on its cool, solid frame. "I get it," David said finally, his voice quiet but clear in the cavernous space. "I don't know if I would have had the guts to do it, but I get it. This is us, not that glass prison." That was the moment I knew I had a partner, not just an employee. We made a decision then, surrounded by the ghosts of our beginning. We wouldn't take the venture capital, but we would grow. We would build an empire, just not the one they wanted. We would build an empire of second chances. We used the Stratusdine money not for lavish salaries or marketing blitzes, but to acquire a small, bankrupt manufacturing plant on the edge of town. It was a dinosaur, a place that time had forgotten. And it was perfect. We hired our first real team, but we didn't headhunt from Ivy League schools or poach from competitors. We went to halfway houses. We partnered with rehabilitation programs. We hired ex-cons, recovering addicts, people with gaps in their resumes longer than the resumes themselves. People like me. The established business community thought it was a publicity stunt, a disastrously naive one. "You're building a team of liabilities," my new, expensive accountant warned me. "The insurance alone will be astronomical." I looked him in the eye. "The greatest asset a person can have," I said, "is a point to prove. I'm not hiring liabilities. I'm hiring assets with a furnace for motivation." It was chaotic. It was messy. There were setbacks. An employee relapsed. Another had a parole violation. We had to build support systems, mentorship programs, a culture of radical honesty and accountability. It wasn't just about giving someone a job. It was about giving them a framework for a new life. We taught financial literacy. We had group sessions. We became a family, a ragged, resilient, fiercely loyal family. And something incredible happened. The work that came out of that plant was sublime. The focus, the dedication, the sheer will to prove themselves worthy of the trust. It translated into a level of quality and innovation that our clean competitors couldn't match. Our reputation shifted. We were no longer just the ex-cons company. We were the company that solved impossible problems with an unbreakable team. Our client list grew, not in spite of our mission, but because of it. Companies wanted to work with us, to be part of the story. Apex became a beacon, a multi-million-dollar, then $100 million, then a $500 million beacon. We were profitable, sustainable, and wholly ours. I had built my empire not on the ashes of my past, but with the very people society had thrown away. Every success was their success. Every closed deal was a middle finger to every Frank who had ever doubted us. The throne I built wasn't made of gold from a VC firm. It was forged in the fires of our shared redemption, and it was worth more than any number on a term sheet. But the final piece of the story, the twist that would tie my entire journey into a perfect, painful knot, was still waiting in the wings, and it was about to walk through my door. The day the news broke that Apex was being valued at $2 billion, the world looked different. The sunlight hitting the polished floor of our headquarters seemed sharper. The air itself hummed with a new frequency. My phone blew up with calls from reporters, from old acquaintances, from a world that suddenly wanted a piece of the man they had once thrown away. I felt a quiet satisfaction, a solid calm. We had done it, not just me. David and Leo, and every single person in our plant who had been given that crucial, life-altering chance. My assistant's voice came over the intercom, hesitant. "Mr. Thorne, there's a man here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment. He says his name is Frank." The name landed not like a punch, but like a key turning in a lock deep inside me. Frank. The name I'd carried as a fuel for years. The ghost from the trailer. I felt the old cold anger stir, but it was distant now, a relic in a museum of my past life. "Send him in," I said, my voice even. The door opened, and time seemed to fold in on itself. It was him. But the mountain of a man was gone. He was thinner, stooped, his face a web of deeper lines. The arrogance in his eyes had been replaced by a hollow, desperate shame. He stood there, clutching a worn cap in his hands, looking every one of his years and more. He didn't speak for a long moment, his eyes taking in the office, the view, the reality of the empire his cruelty had helped spark. "Alex," he finally said, the word a dry rasp. I saw the news." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "I don't have an excuse. What I did to you, it was inhuman. I was a bitter, broken man who thought tearing others down was the only way to feel tall. I just watched him, silent, letting him stand in the discomfort of his own confession. I lost everything," he continued, his voice cracking. "The business, my house, my family. Karma, I guess." He tried a weak, pathetic smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'm here to swallow my pride. I have nothing left. I was wondering if a company that believes in second chances had one for an old, foolish man." There it was, the moment I had fantasized about for years. The power to grant or deny. The power to be the one slamming the door. I could have him thrown out. I could lecture him. I could make him beg. I could finally hand him back the torn pieces of the dignity he'd stolen from me. I stood up and walked around my desk. I didn't look at him with pity or with triumph. I looked at him as a man who had also hit rock bottom. The circle was complete. The man who taught me the world had no mercy was now asking me for the very thing he denied me. "Frank," I said, my voice quiet but filling the space. "This company was built on a simple idea. That the worst moment in your life doesn't have to define the rest of it." I saw a flicker of hope in his weary eyes. I reached into my wallet, my fingers finding the brittle, yellowed edge I had carried for a decade. I pulled out the torn piece of my resume and held it out to him. It was a fragile, pathetic thing, a relic of a pain that no longer had power over me. He stared at it, confusion and then dawning horror on his face. He remembered. "I don't need this anymore," I said softly. "And you don't need a job." His face fell, the hope extinguished. He thought this was my final rejection. I turned and looked out the window at the city, at the world that had once rejected us both. You need a partner. I'm opening a new division, a foundation to train and mentor at-risk youth. I need someone who knows construction, someone who isn't afraid of hard work, and someone, I said, turning back to him, my gaze steady, who understands the cost of a mistake better than anyone. The salary is $1 a year. The work will be the hardest you've ever done, but it's a chance to build something that actually matters, to leave a legacy that isn't made of torn resumes. Frank didn't cry, he crumpled. The tough, hardened shell of the man shattered right there on the floor of my office, and what was left was just a raw, broken human being, sobbing with a grief and gratitude so profound it filled the room. He wasn't being offered a handout. He was being offered a chance to redeem himself, just as I had been. In saving him, I was finally, completely, saving that last little piece of myself that still remembered the taste of his contempt. The student had become the teacher. The judge had become the redeemer. And the empire of second chances had just found its most unlikely cornerstone.